Welcome to HuntStand's Deer Dirt. In the last episode I talked about the fact that the perfect ratio of habitat to food is 5% food or more. So that would be permanent food. This is the stuff that doesn't get combined. This is the year-round, ideally, food sources that the deer can utilize. This week I want to talk about what to put in those 5%. You know, what that combination should look like. I think there's about as many ways to do this as there are people who own and manage hunting land. Everybody's got their own opinion on this, so I'm just going to give you my thoughts on it. I don't know if it backs up with biology, but it really backs up well with hunting strategy. And that is, you know, what percentage is greens and what percentage is grain, and then what part of the greens are clover, alfalfa, the legumes, what part are the brassicas, and then also how to break down the grains, you know, into the various options that you've got there. So with that in mind, we got a fair amount we can talk about. I'm standing in a brassica plot right here. This was a Whitetail Institute winter greens, and I had originally started here with beans. This was supposed to have been one of my grains plots. It was going to be soybeans. We had that drought early spring, mid-spring, early summer. Just couldn't get anything to grow. So even though the beans were there, the seed was there, it just grew so slowly that the deer were able to stay on top of the growth of the beans. They never really got anywhere. So I came back in here in late July and drilled the winter greens into this. I didn't do anything other than just spray glyphosate over the beans to kill all the weeds, and then just left the beans and drilled right into the beans with the winter greens. And as you can see, it did really, really well. This was a definite success for me, and I'll walk down the plot just a little bit and show you some more of the spots that are, you know, where it's super thick. So this one worked out. I call that rescuing, but it did take away some of the grains that I had planned for the farm. And some years you're going to have that. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. Rarely is it going to be perfect. So with that in mind, let's talk about greens. On a farm like this, that's mostly habitat with a limited amount of farming, you know, I would call it commercial farming. There's not going to be tons and tons of grain here, you know, left over from cropping, because there's just not that much cropland to begin with. So again, I'm leaning a little bit heavier towards grains. But my greens is going to be, say, 30% of my total, 30 to 40%, maybe a little bit less than that. So if I'm putting in, let's say, 20 acres of food plots, then roughly 6 acres of that is going to be, 6 to 7 acres is going to be greens. And among the greens, I'm going to say most of it is going to be the annuals, the brassicas, with a lesser amount being the clovers and alfalfa, the legumes. And the reason I do that is I like to have the clover in little smaller spots, you know, tucked away, little pockets, places where, you know, I can hunt them more easily. I would call them kill plots. I've never done really well with big, large clover fields. And it just never seemed like you get the best bang for the buck with those. I'd rather have something else in there, you know, like soybeans, for example, where they could eat the leaves during the summer and get their, you know, protein that way, and then during the fall and winter they've got the, you know, the pods that they can eat. So on bigger patches, I'm leaning more towards grains, and if the grains fail, then it's going to be greens like you see behind me with the brassicas. So let's say, again, I've got 20 acres. I'll bet you I'll have 10% of that, 2 acres, maybe a little bit more than that, maybe 3 acres in clover, and then I'll start out with about that much in brassica in the smaller patches, you know, the greens in total, clover and the brassicas. And I just rotate them. When the clover kind of runs its course, and usually it takes about 3 years, you know, with most blends before they kind of play out, then I kill the clover and incorporate it back into the ground, you know, till it in, and then get a year of brassica there, and then go back to clover again. It's a real easy rotation to maintain in those plots. It's deer tolerant. If you go into a 1 acre or smaller plot, if you've got any kind of grain in there with any deer number whatsoever, they're going to wipe it out. But you can do okay in there with clover and to a lesser extent with brassicas. You know, the deer will hammer the brassicas pretty good too, but you're only in there for a year and then back to clover. So anyway, hopefully you get the drift there. You know, I'm going to rotate on those greens. My intentional greens plots are going to be one of two things, either clover or brassicas, and I'm rotating. As soon as the clover, you know, runs its course, you know, I'm back into the brassicas again. So on the other end, you know, now I'm talking about, do I plant beans? Do I plant corn? Do I plant sorghum? That is so dependent on deer density and the location of those spots. It's really kind of hard, like I said, to give a one, you know, set answer that fits everybody's situation. So I'm going to kind of qualify it as I'm discussing this. If your deer density is not too high, corn is really pretty awesome. I mean, deer don't utilize it too much during the summer. That's where your greens come in, you know, and maybe even, you know, if you've got soybeans planted someplace nearby, they're eating that too during the summer. But during the fall and winter, the corn does an awesome job of creating the carbohydrates that the deer need to be really, you know, to stay warm, to be healthy, to maintain energy throughout the winter. And that's super important. So I do like corn. There are situations, of course, where the deer density is just too high and the deer eat the corn during the summer, and then there's nothing there. That doesn't work. In situations like that, you either have to fall back to more greens, or you've got to switch up what grains you plant. And you can plant beans in that environment and then come back and rescue that with the greens. So I know it's getting kind of complicated, but so let's just go back to this situation like behind me. So let's just say that my intention was for this to be beans and then brassicas. It did a good job, you know, because as the beans were coming up, the deer were eating it, and now there's tons of green forage here to carry them through the fall and winter. So this one was a success. And that's one option if there's just too many deer to get away with corn. Another option if there's too many deer to get away with corn is sorghum. The deer don't eat the sorghum during the summer. They leave it alone. And then during the early fall, late summer, early fall, they start to get onto it. And you kind of keep an eye on that. They like to eat it when the seed is doughy, you know, when the seed is soft. And if you get it past that stage, then they usually don't eat it very much until, you know, later into the late fall and early winter. So sorghum is a definite option in areas where the deer density is so high that you can't grow corn. The other option, of course, is to fence your food plots. I don't really like that as well. I've done it, you know, with the electric fence. You know, it's a lot of work. It does, you know, it does the job. It's effective, but you know, to me, it just feels like a Band-Aid, because if you've got so many deer that they're wiping out your food plots, you don't have enough food for a healthy herd, or you've got too many deer. So just fencing it is like slapping a Band-Aid, you know, on a wound that really needs surgery. That surgery is more food or less deer. So, like I said, the fencing will work, and I've done it. And maybe in some key spots, like some little tucked away, you know, perfect little kill spots, it makes sense. You know, put something in there, keep the deer off it during the summer, open it up, you know, prior to the season, and then have that be one of your, you know, better spots that you hunt. But as far as, you know, having the primary food sources fenced, again, to me, that just feels like you're missing the whole point of you know, creating a healthy herd. You don't want deer that are stressed and hungry all the time. So trying to wrap a bow on this, I think the small plots need to be greens, you know, right from the start. Clover, rotation with brassicas. The bigger spots can be, should be primarily grains, with a emphasis on, you know, maybe soybeans, and then the ability to drill into that or to plant into that. You can even broadcast into soybeans and have some success with the brassicas. So that would be plan B. And then in the perfect world, you would have enough open ground and a low enough deer density that you can plant corn or sorghum and get those through into the winter, because they're going to do the deer the most good when it's really cold. And the beans are going to be a good, second priority or plan B for the fall and winter, because the deer definitely will eat the pods, they'll eat the beans, eat the leaves during the summer, pods and beans during the fall and winter. So I know this gets a little bit confusing, and like I said, there's a lot of different ways to do it, but summing up my own philosophy, I go lower on the greens, heavier on the grains, knowing that I can always come back if my grain plots fail with drilling the brassicas into them during the summer. Okay, one last thing for us to talk about, and that's how to get the seed in the ground. The whole trick is the seed to soil contact. You've got to get the seed in contact with the dirt, and then there's got to be sufficient moisture there for it to germinate and grow. So on a dry year, it can be really tough because the seed sits on top of the ground for a long time. It takes at least a couple of good rains to soften everything up, get the seed worked down where it's in good contact with the ground, so it's getting, the place to put the root down. You're way better off if you can afford it, or if you can, rent the machine, is the no-till drill. If you can get the seed into the ground, you might find a little bit of subsoil moisture, get it to germinate right away and start growing. Wet year, you can do fine with broadcasting, but you can't predict it. In my experience, especially this past year, everything I tried that didn't go into the ground itself failed. In the smaller plots, I've done okay with tilling it up and then broadcasting, especially clovers or the really small seeds on top of the fresh dirt. You can get really good seed to soil contact, you can get good germination, but again, you have to have the rains to go with it, because now you've brought up all that dirt and you've dried it out, where it would have been a lot more beneficial if you could have put the seed right down into that moist soil. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an idea of the trade-offs between tillage and no-till when it comes to planting food plots. One of the other topics that we talked about last week was habitat. I'm going to come back in 2 more weeks and talk about timber stand improvement, how you do it, how it improves the habitat, the forage, the browse in the timber, also some of the benefits of how that affects the dynamics of the deer herd. Believe it or not, you can make a property hold more mature bucks just by making it thicker. So I appreciate you joining me. We'll see you right back here again in 2 weeks for the next episode of HuntStand's Deer Dirt.